Hi, this is Heidi Gaiman from ilovemyshepherd.com with another episode of Ministry Talks. Today we're going to talk about friendship in ministry. This is one of the things that I hear the most from people in ministry life, whether it's someone serving in ministry or one of their family members, and in whatever role of ministry they serve in, struggling to find a good friend and struggling with friendship, or struggling because their friends maybe that they went to school with or that they had in one location they had to move away from, and they're spread out across the country or the world even. Friendship and loneliness are one of the top two concerns that I hear from ministry families a lot. It's this weird ball of amazing relationships in ministry, and living in the paradox of the relationalness of it, and how many great places and people's lives you get to be a part of, but then also struggling with the loneliness and the isolation that kind of comes up in ministry, where you feel like you are missing that thing that is, a really good friend or a good group of friends, and not just people to hang out with, but people to be yourself. So we're going to talk a lot about vulnerability today. We're also going to talk about some mindfulness, and leaning into some difficult situations, some situations that may be complicated, or might require some thought, some intentionality, if you will, but then also some spontaneity, and we're going to talk about all those things. And so to start out, I want to admit a cultural reality, and that is that our culture believes that friendship is easy, or that it should be easy. And we're going to call that out as a complete lie. Number one, friendship itself doesn't happen easily. It doesn't just pop up as like a natural thing that happens between people. Occasionally, we come to someone, or someone comes to us, and we begin a conversation, and suddenly we realize, you too, and we have that moment. And C.S. Lewis talks about it. Brene Brown talks about that moment, where you just connect with someone in a really unique way. That does happen. However, even that takes some work, and we're going to show some steps to get there. How do you begin to find those people that you can connect with? And then the other side of it is that relationship itself, even if it began somewhat easily, which, like I said, I don't know that I believe in that, also takes work. Just like marriage takes work, just like parenting takes work, just like work relationships take work, friendship is also work. And I think we have to drop that idea of easy in order to get to the relationships that are meaningful and help us feel less isolated. So we're going to walk into some real complicated things. Like I said, we're not going to cover everything, and the whole world's ideas of friendships and what we should do and everything, but we are going to hit on hopefully some ways to make walking into finding a friendship a little easier, and then also keeping and maintaining friendships and being able to be open and vulnerable. So both inside the congregation, inside of churches or work institutions and things, and then also outside of it. So first I want to start with a Bible verse. This was a Bible verse that I hadn't really ever applied to friendship until I read it one time when I myself was struggling and wanting a friend in the day-to-day. There's different kinds of friendships. There's friendships for like a moment, for an activity, for something we're doing. There's friendships for a season that we have, maybe when we're a young parent or when we're in retirement. You might have different seasons of friendships. And then there's also friendships that can last a lifetime. And so I really was missing that, having that day-to-day friend, that seasonal friend that I needed for young motherhood. Honestly, it was like a time in my life where we had moved, we were in a new place, it was my husband's first call, and I felt really lonely, and I needed someone to walk through this kind of stage of early motherhood with. And all my friends were spread out from college and having babies elsewhere. So this Bible verse stuck out to me and was really helpful to me in that moment, and it has been helpful ever since. So we're going to actually talk about Jonathan. We're not going to talk about David, even though Jonathan and David, as you know, usually are like two peas in a pod, right? They're buddies, which is kind of another cool story we get in the Bible about true friendship and kind of that brotherhood of friendship, that sisterhood of friendship. But this passage in 1 Samuel 14, and you can read the whole story in verses 1 through 7, maybe a little bit further, but I'm actually just going to read verses 6 and 7. And this is about Jonathan and his armor bearer, the guy who carried his armor for him. And they're going to go and they're doing this kind of secret operative mission where they're going to go into the Philistine territory and engage them in battle and take out people. And it's like a very manly story. Not that, us women folk don't like a good battle or things like blowing up in superhero movies and such. However, it's just a really neat story to see people connect in different circumstances, I think, than when we would normally think of as friendship. Normally we think of people, meeting at an event or walking along the street. But this is oftentimes friendship is formed in the trenches, in something kind of difficult or in a moment where someone's in need. So let's just see Jonathan and his armor bearer. It's 1 Samuel 14, 6 and 7. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised," which is again the Philistines. "It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." And his armor bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart. Do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul." And I realized in my own life, I was looking for someone who was with me, heart and soul. Someone who would take me for me, would know that I was messy and had some mistakes, but was willing to walk through them. Would also hold me accountable, would not let me get by with being, kind of the cruddy version of myself, but expected a little bit more, but was also willing to give a lot of grace. And also just willing to walk into this world together. The world isn't an easy place. And I really believe that's one of the primary reasons God gives us friendships is to hold one another accountable, but to also hold each other up through this battle-worn life on earth until we get to heaven. And so I think it's kind of cool that God gives Jonathan his armor bearer in this place that he's in that says, do all that's in your heart. I am with you, heart and soul. So it's kind of the vantage point we're going to look at of true friendship is that place where we say, I am with you, heart and soul. I really love that language for it. And so one thing I did, and I'll attach the article, you can read about this on my blog if you want, but is just pray to the Lord over that passage. Lord, heart and soul, I need a friend. Lord, heart and soul, I need a friend. And so that's step one of friendship, I think, is bringing it before the Lord. And it sounds really cheesy, but it's that whole thing where we do everything else in our power about something before we bring it to God in prayer. And so let's dial it back. And step one, pray to the Lord. Lord, please bring a friend. Put someone in my life. Identify someone for me. Open my eyes to someone. Help me to see where there's time, energy, open hearts, things like that. And just pray over friendship for yourself or for your spouse. Sometimes, especially as a ministry spouse in my life, I really want a good friend for my husband because I think that would take the burden off for him of so much in life. But I can't make that happen for other people, nor is that maybe a good place for me to be in my marriage. But also being able to pray to God is a place that is wonderful for my marriage. Lord, send a friend. Please help. Send someone that we can engage with as a couple, maybe a mentor couple that we could have a friendship to share about our marriage, things like that. Pray over those different places of friendship that you're looking for. So that's step one. Step two, recognizing that friendship will continue to be a challenge as long as we walk the earth. Again, this is that whole idea that the world says that friendship is easy and we believe differently. We know that relationships are never easy, nor were they meant to be easy. Friendships are valuable because God is relational, because God created relationship. And so we're gonna look for friendships, we're gonna look for relationships, and we know that isolation is not healthy for us because God created us to be relational. We see this in Genesis 2 when God creates marriage. He creates Adam and Eve, but in creating Eve, he didn't just create a spouse for Adam, he created the first relationships that we get to see. And in Genesis 2:25, it says, the man and wife were both naked and not ashamed. And yes, that is clearly for marriage, but I would like to propose that there is a place of relational health that is without shame in our relationships in general, that we were created to have deep and intimate relationships, some of them friendships, and then of course, marriage for those people who are married, but there is a place where holiness is also in singleness. And so I think that's one reason we can take this passage in Genesis 2:25 and apply it to our friendships as well, that we are made to be people who are relational and have relationships that exist without shame, whereas Satan otherwise will continuously throw shame in our lives because we don't have those places and spaces where we can be vulnerable. But when we are vulnerable, things are just kind of thrown at us, like expectations and judgment and maybe even like persecution, like we don't have solid Christian relationships where we can be ourselves. Instead, that's what Satan wants for our relationships. Instead, what God gives us is safety in places where we can be ourselves, but also where forgiveness can exist. And we'll get a little bit more into that. So Satan wants isolation. We want it to be easy. These dynamics kind of work together to make friendship really difficult. So just admitting that friendship is a challenge and that it's a challenge for everyone. You are not the first person that has struggled with friendship, my friend. I wish it were different, but maybe that can also be encouraging that friendship is a struggle for everyone. I am a person who makes friends very easily. Most people assume that I'm very extroverted, which is sort of true. Like I also like time to myself. And so just because you're an introvert or extrovert doesn't mean it's going to be easier or harder for you. It just is. We'll all struggle with it. But anything that's, I think, kind of hard is also the things in life that are worth it. And that we know that God is really going to work in, the struggles and the wrestling of it. Also, it's not going to be easy because we are in ministry, and there are dynamics of ministry that surely complicate this idea of friendship and the kind of friends we have and where we find them. So we do have to consider ministry dynamics. For instance, one overt dynamic that we need to consider with ministry and friendship is the concept of dual relationships. And we talk about this a lot in the counseling professions or other helping professions, but I'm not sure we talk about it very much in ministry, particularly pastoral ministry or even commissioned ministry and teaching ministry. And so let's define what dual relationships are. First, that is having a relationship, one relationship with someone where you are in a helping role, where you are in a role of even like authority of some kind. But then also the dual is having another relationship with that person that is a more casual, I guess, so often. That is like friendship or family or providing a different kind of service. I'm not even sure that would happen, but there's a reason like you don't do someone's hair when you're also their mechanic, but see how that is less weird than if I'm your pastor and I also am your close friend. I'm not going to do that. I'm a deaconess. I'm not a pastor. But if I'm your deaconess and we're also like best buddies, it just complicates it. I'm not saying that that's completely impossible in ministry professions to be friends with the people that you serve, but you have to acknowledge at the very least the dual relationship. And so like, for instance, when you're counseling someone, you normally would not it's not recommended that you counsel your close family or friends. It's not recommended that you counsel your like hairdresser or your mechanic or those other people. So I think you can already see the complication here, but just so that it's obvious, one thing that we really need to be concerned about is like authority and intimacy. And so I want you to go and have meaningful relationships with the people in your congregation and in your institutions and those things. However, just really asking God to help you sort through the paradox of those things and how to work with the authority. I mean, this is one reason why it's so easy for people to step into inappropriate relationships, to have affairs in churches and things, because there's so much intimacy and vulnerability to be had. And we're going to talk about that. But there's also, we need protecting factors for us, but especially for our people. When we are in a role of ministry, in particular, when we're the actual ministry professional, unfortunately, we can easily take advantage of authority in ways we didn't intend to, or slip into ways of taking advantage of our authority. And so we want to be professional. I'm not saying you can't have friends within your congregation. However, that dual relationship needs to be considered and addressed. I mean, in the friendship, just be open and honest. Just be open and honest. And we'll talk about that so often. Just being open, putting the stuff on the table in your friendship is another thing we're going to do. And so I think that dual relationship is complicated. This is especially hard, I've noticed, for pastors' wives, because they're not directly in ministry. It's kind of unfair because you're like, this shouldn't impact me. I'm no one's authority. I'm no one's counsel or spiritual caregiver. But for whatever reason, there's kind of a rollover, and there is some kind of weird dual relationship there that we have to address. And so, yes, please have friends, pastors' wives, in your congregation, but just know that there's like a paradoxical weirdness to the vocation of pastors' wives for whatever reason. And so we're going to be kind of careful with how we, address that in relationships, and just being honest about it. Having other people to help hold us accountable and things, very important. Also noting one reason that it's not easy, step 2, admitting that it's not easy, it's a challenge, friendship is a challenge, is that church work can be very professional. Church work can be very personal. I apologize. It can be really personal. And so it's easy to take things really personally. And in general, in friendships, we should not always agree with the people that we're friends with. That's not real friendship. It's just, I agree, and you're a yes man and stuff like that. Instead, we aren't always going to agree with people we have deep personal relationships with. And so understanding that probably will happen within the church too. So if you're really close to someone within the church and then they have like this issue with the church, man, that can be really difficult on the friendship. And then to lose not only members of your congregation that you care about, but also people that you are friends with can be, just a huge blow. That doesn't mean you don't walk into it. That doesn't mean you don't take on that challenge. It does mean being aware of it and being honest in that friendship and in that congregational relationship is really important. And so we're gonna address that. So step 2 was, it's not easy. It's not easy, and we're just going to recognize it. All right, so then what's step 3? Step 3 is being vulnerable in those relationships. So we're going to walk into friendship, walk into a relationship that we identify, I want to know this person more. I want to spend more time with this person. I want to encourage this person, but I also want them to be an encouragement to me. I want to grow with this person. We're going to walk into vulnerability then. We cannot have friendships without vulnerability. And by definition, vulnerability at its face value is being exposed. Well, that doesn't sound very comfortable. So you can go back to not easy, right? But vulnerability is an essential element of friendship, and especially a step, the step into moving, recognizing someone that we want to spend time with, moving it further is being vulnerable. So what's included? Well, if you go back to Genesis 2:25, what happened because of sin is that Adam and Eve hid. They hid from God, they hid from one another, they put on the fig leaves. And so one thing we need to do in relationships to deepen them is to stop hiding. And so we have to offer ourselves to be exposed, both to find a friend as well as to keep a friend. And so choosing places to be vulnerable, where is an appropriate place where we can show some deeper authenticity, some things that we struggle with or that are especially important to us, that, those might be some professional spaces and places, but they also, you're going to want to be in situations, having dinner with people, going places with people where you can be yourself is really important. Having a conversation, even in the narthex, but saying, hey, would you like to have coffee to talk about this more, as friends, like as people who can encourage one another and being honest about that. And you're going to have to share some of your own struggle. We can't tuck it deep inside. Because if we want other people to share and be vulnerable, we also have to share and be vulnerable. That speaks grace to people and that grows friendships. So what about boundaries? Boundaries are important and needed, especially because there's sin in our world. And so that means we're going to mess up, those other people are going to mess up, and we want to minimize kind of the damage of when we do mess up. But I do think boundaries have their place even without sin, defining where you're at in friendship, understanding that friendships don't happen from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, whatever. But that knowing what's kind of appropriate as you begin friendships versus when you've known each other for a few years and spent a great deal of time together, what you can bring up, where are safe places, that's part of boundaries for both you and the other person. Also, that armor idea. And we talked about the armor bearer of Jonathan, which I think is really kind of just an interesting thing because Dr. Brene Brown talks about, when she talks about vulnerability, we also have an armor that we put on. We have several things that we put on that will keep us safe, and honestly, that will kind of hide us. And I think that God instead gives us, instead of just leaving us completely naked and exposed, he gives us different armor, right? He gives us the armor of God. He gives us the breastplate of truth. He gives us the sword of the Spirit, the word of God to be in. And those things, that foundation of God in our lives is the thing that will grow our friendships too, because we're healthier people. We're able to be more vulnerable when we have the Word of God, when we have His truth in our lives. And so we can walk into things and maybe have different boundaries than someone would need who's not healthy, who isn't studying the Word of God, who isn't getting filled in those ways. So we can maybe be a little bit more risky with our hearts because we have God in them. So here's some things for actually being vulnerable in relationships. Number 1, do the inviting. I cannot tell you how often I hear people say, I just want someone to call me and ask me to do something. Or, these other people went out and they didn't ask me along. So one thing I've noticed that's true in and outside of ministry is that we do not invite enough. So one way of being vulnerable and leaning in to find a friend is to do the inviting. Just reach out to someone you'd like to spend time with. There are so many people waiting to be invited, and good friendship can happen. Just invite. Ask them to coffee. Ask them to see a movie. Ask them over for dinner. Something that seems like it would work for you. You don't, yes, you need to maybe go out of your way sometimes, but at the same time, do something that works in your life, in your schedule, in your time too. That's part of friendship. So let's see. Number 2, know there will be hurt and pain. Just that's part of vulnerability, is knowing that friendships won't always be sunshine and roses and kittens, right? That there will be hurt and pain in real friendship because we're either carrying each other's hurt and pain from other things, or unfortunately, we will hurt each other if we're being actually deep and meaningful in our relationships, but knowing there's forgiveness for that and there's God's care for that. Number 3, 2 things that grow relationship. Awkwardness and forgiveness. Awkwardness and forgiveness. I teach this to my youth all the time. So again, there will be hurt and pain in relationships, and so forgiveness is going to be necessary. Somebody's going to say something dumb at some time. But good news, that grows a relationship. When we walk through that stuff together, the relationship, instead of just imploding, can grow through the reconciliation and through the tender comfort that happens, through the honesty that happens. So awkwardness also, sometimes things just get weird. Like you say something and you're like, I don't know if this is okay to ask you. I don't know if we're there yet. Being honest about that. Even saying, in the narthex, like to someone at church, I really would just really like a friend. Like, how do you feel about friendship? That's awkward, isn't it? It's an awkward thing, but it grows the relationship. And you'll kind of know right away if someone's like, yeah, I'm game on. I kind of love that you just said that. Or like, no way. And maybe you're the person who needs to text that instead because, you can't just walk up to someone. That's cool too. Again, awkwardness grows friendship. It's okay to be weird and embrace it and be a little awkward. Yeah, I think that's okay. So let's see. Also addressing expectations directly. So, what do you need from this friendship? That's an awesome question to ask, and saying like, I have some things I need from this friendship. Would you be up for hearing them? We're grown-ups. And so I think that's one grown-up thing to do, is to actually admit that you have to have weird conversations and you have to sort things out. And expectation does exist in relationship always. And so getting them out on the table makes it a little bit easier. So having an uncomfortable conversation and just addressing expectations, particularly in ministry life where there's weird dual relationship thing going on and all of that. Also finding a script. So if you are like, I don't know how to deal with this thing, I don't normally recommend this, but I'm just going to say it. Just Google it. Like, someone has dealt with it. That doesn't mean they're experts, and that doesn't mean that you just want to trust everything you read on the internet. Lord help us. I think you guys know better than that. But at the same time, like, find someone who's dealt with it and ask. Find, if you have a mentor, ask them what they would do. Bob Goff has this really awesome thing called Bob plus 10. So find someone who you want to look like in 10 years and ask them how they've handled situations like this. That's like the heart of mentoring, I think. But yeah, find a script, find something that kind of works that someone else has used, and that's okay. It may not work perfectly for you, but it'll at least get your wheels spinning on how to deal with these different ideas and concepts of friendship. So those are all very vulnerable things in a way that we're going to stop hiding. We're going to take off those fig leaves and let God, instead show us how to care for one another in this thing called friendship, and how to get our needs met in this thing called friendship. So then the next step to friendship is mindfulness. So once you have a friend, we're going to continue to be vulnerable there, but we're also going to be mindful. And mindfulness at its core is just an awareness, bringing what is unconscious to conscious level. So just instead of like letting those dynamics stay under the table of what makes a friendship work for you or not, bringing them forward. And so just talking about those dynamics, again, we already kind of talked about that in vulnerability, but in any relationship, there's always going to be dynamics going on. And so talking about them, talking about what you need, just like marriages kind of implode when we don't talk about what we need and tell someone, we can't expect mind reading friendships. It does not work. Being mindful that everyone has a backstory. You have a backstory and it's going to impact your friendships, and that person has a backstory and it's going to impact the friendship. So being honest about that and being mindful. Is there something else going on here? That's always a good question to ask in relationships. So 6 particular things to be mindful about, or ways to be mindful in friendship. Number 1, mindful of confidence and confidentiality. And so we have this professional thing we call confidentiality. And so we're going to want to keep doing that if we're in a professional relationship with someone. Maintain confidentiality. I think that and just speak it too, because I think sometimes people wonder, they don't understand that like we do actually in ministry keep confidentiality. We don't have HIPAA, but at the same time, we should and do have a very strict policy of confidentiality, and we keep things to ourselves when we're told, things that are deep, meaningful, special struggles, wrestling, things like that. Pain, sorrow, all of that we keep confidential. But we also have this thing in friendship called confidence. And so confidence is just basically this professional idea of confidentiality, but taken to friendship and being deep and meaningful in friendship. When we keep confidence, when we don't say someone else's stuff to someone, when we don't grow friendship by talking about people behind their back and things, that keeps confidence and that builds trust. And so understanding that both those things go hand in hand. So that actual dynamic of ministry where we are supposed to keep confidential and stuff, we should be doing in friendship anyway. We shouldn't be growing our friendships on the back of someone else's problem. Shouldn't be talking about other people as part of our friendship. Instead, building trust in that relationship will be true, whether it's a ministry relationship or whether it's friendship in the community or both. So just kind of, it sounds like common sense, but honestly, I don't think there's anything that's common sense, I've noticed. So just, keeping confidence and confidentiality. Also, understanding that, mandated reporting is mandated reporting. So if you serve in any ministry capacity, and then maybe some other capacities as a family member in ministry, is that you're a mandated reporter. And so if there's something that happens that you need to report, some kind of child abuse, if someone is hurting themselves or other people, or possibly going to hurt themselves or other people, then unfortunately that's the way life is now. Sorry. Even if you're just hanging out with this person as a friend. I had one friendship completely implode because of confidentiality that person felt like, but it was really mandated reporting. And I wish I would have told all my friends, and I try to do it now, is I'm a mandated reporter, just so you know, just being honest, because that matters more. There's a reason there's mandated reporting. If something sounds off or fishy about someone's spouse and what's going on with their children at home and blah, 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 and all this other stuff, I'm sure you can dream up ideas in your head. Just knowing that God asks us to care for the little ones all around us. God asks us to care for, wives who are being abused and all of these different things. And that doesn't change just because someone's our friend. So I think mandated reporting is always important. Let's see, misunderstandings and assumptions. We're going to be mindful of misunderstandings and assumptions. We will have misunderstandings. That's part of friendship. That's deep and meaningful in any way. There will also be assumptions, and that is something we want to be aware of so that we can take assumptions off the table, stop assuming things, and again, be real honest. It's easy to assume someone meant something one way when they may not have, or to assume someone, reads the Bible every day, or to assume someone is having an awesome marriage, or to assume it's just very destructive to friendships to assume things. So we want to be mindful of asking a lot of questions instead of assuming things. Number 3 things to be mindful of, differences. So I realized one day that when I got married, I thought I got married because we were kind of the same, because we liked all the same things. And we kind of do that in friendship too. We become friends because we like all the same things. But then I noticed in my marriage, the longer we were married, that the things that were actually more important is how we were different, that we complemented each other, that where I was impatient, he was patient, and where he was shy and not as talkative, I was talkative and, creating conversation. The same thing is true in friendships. We need to be able to embrace the differences if we're going to have a friendship that goes the distance. Otherwise, it's also okay to have those friendships for a season. We were moms together at this point, and at this point, our kids are doing different things, and maybe we're not as close anymore. That's okay too. But recognizing when we need to embrace the differences a little bit more and just be mindful of them and appreciate them. It'd be boring if we were all the same. Number 4, things to be mindful out of 6, baggage. And that's that backstory, just knowing that I come with baggage, that you come with baggage, and that makes up how we're able to trust, how we're able to interact and take in affection and care and give affection and conversation, just being mindful of that. and talking about it. Number 5, the power dynamics of ministry. Address those open and honestly. Again, being aware of that dual relationship, continuing to be mindful. We talked about at the beginning, before you get into friendships, being aware that there's some dual relationships going on in different places and spaces in your life. But also then, as you continue friendships, be mindful of any kind of power dynamics. One thing about ministry that maybe seems unfair in our culture is that we often represent God to those people. We represent the church to those people. And while that is an unfair burden, it is also just true. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And so sometimes we need to be aware of that and be real honest. Like, hey, God is perfect and I am absolutely not perfect. In the Bible, it says like that he doesn't give up on us, that he doesn't change like shifting sand. And sometimes, I do. And addressing the sin that is yours, maybe in that friendship and that relationship that you committed, and helping that person discern the difference between God and you in that moment might be kind of important for your friendships, particularly in ministry. And then the last one is confusion of spirituality. So understanding when people need like a pastor or need a teacher or I'm a social worker, a counselor, when they need that kind of professional part of you and when they just need a friend. So I am like terrible at this with my closest relationships. Like I constantly have my social work hat on. I constantly want to give people advice about how to do relationships like I currently am. My friends don't always need that from me. Instead, they just need someone to listen and someone to say that stinks and someone to sit with them and care for them. So being able to separate those things and be able to bring Jesus to people in your friendships is a really important aspect of friendship, instead of confusing them with like who you're being at the minute. Talking about Jesus when it doesn't always have to do with your role in ministry or the church or in your ministry family, because it does confuse people as to what they're going to get from this friendship. And so, I don't know, just being yourself with Jesus, I guess, as part of your life, apart from this vocation you have in ministry, is really important for helping people not be confused by your, spirituality and where they can go for help with different problems and things like that. Wrestle with your friends. Absolutely. That's part of it. But do so as a friend, not always as, this vocational person who's in ministry life. So a few recommendations for some resources on friendship. I really appreciate the book Uninvited by Lisa TerKeurst. It is particularly for women and friendships for women, but I find it really useful, just like this idea that we do feel so often kind of outcast or uninvited, and the importance of letting God fill those spaces. Another one that I found was really helpful for anyone is actually called SWF Seeking BFF, and that someone recommended it to me at the seminary years ago. And once I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, this has so many awesome ideas about friendship and research about friendship. And so I think it just has this really cool concept where she decides to just go out and try new friends. And she's going to try so many, one for each week of the year, I think. But you don't have to do any crazy experiments like that, but you can learn from her experiment. And then also there's research about the way friendship is and the way it works intermingled in there. I'm also going to attach some articles to the show notes for this, a Focus on the Family article about friendship in teens, but I think everything applies to people at all stages of life. But it's really helpful about developing friendships that last. And please do share it with your teen if you have one. And then articles on friendship that can be found at ilovemyshepherd.com. I'll also put some of those for you on there. And I tend to talk a lot about, developing deeper friendships and just inviting people in. So next episode is on moving in ministry. And so we'll also talk a little bit about friendship in that, because so often moving really impacts our friendships, and we'll address that more there. If you have any questions, please put them up on the show notes or comment on YouTube. You can also send me a note on the About page at ilovemyshepherd.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.